Hello, my name is Miss England. I am a second grade teacher at Fall Hamilton Elementary. Today, we are going to be reading the book called After the Fall, How Humpty Dumpty Got Back Up Again. This story is by Dan Santat. After we read, we are going to be talking about two different things. First, how to recount a story, and second, how to determine the central message of a story. Before we read, let's talk about those two things. First, to recount a story, what does that mean? That means to retell the story, but it's really important to have all the important parts of the story. So we're going to use a strategy today called the 5-finger retell. In the 5-finger retell, you use your fingers to help recount the important parts of the story. Your thumb is for somebody. Who is the main character of the story? Somebody wanted. What does the main character of the story want? Next finger, but. In most stories, there is a challenge or a problem that the character has to overcome. So we have somebody wanted, but. Your ring finger is for so. What does the character do to try and solve the problem? And your pinky finger is for in the end. How is the problem solved at the end of the story? So for our 5-finger retell, let's review. Somebody wanted, but, so, in the end. While we're reading and after we're reading, we are going to review those components. So when we're finished, we're able to recount or retell the story using our 5-finger retell. The second thing we're going to do today is determine the central message of the story. The central message is the lesson that the author is trying to teach you and me, the readers of the text. There's 4 steps we can take to determine the central message. First, what is the problem? After we have recounted our story, we will know what is the problem. Second, what does the character do about the problem? Third, what lesson does the character learn? And last, what lesson does the author want us as the readers to learn? These are some examples of central messages that are found in stories. Always tell the truth, be kind to others, never give up, don't be afraid to try new things, and treat others the way you want to be treated. After we're finished reading the story, we are going to recount it and determine the central message. Now let's get started reading the text. After the Fall, How Humpty Dumpty Got Back Up Again. A story by Dan Santat. My name is Humpty Dumpty. This was my favorite spot, high up on the wall. I know, it's an odd place for an egg to be, but I loved being close to the birds. Then one day, I fell. I'm sort of famous for that part. Folks call it the Great Fall, which sounds a little grand. It was just an accident, but it changed my life. Fortunately, all the king's men managed to put me back together. Well, most of me. There were some parts that couldn't be healed with bandages and glue. After that day, I became afraid of heights. So already in this story, we are learning that the main character is Humpty Dumpty and that his problem is that he is afraid of heights. We also learned what he wants. He wants to be high up on the wall near the birds. Let's keep reading. After that day, I became afraid of heights. I was so scared that it kept me from enjoying some of my favorite things. I walked past the wall every day, and I would think about climbing that ladder again. I really missed the birds and being high above the city. But I could never do it because I knew that accidents can happen. I eventually settled for watching the birds from the ground. It wasn't the same, but it was better than nothing. Then one day, an idea flew by. Making planes was harder than I thought. It was easy to get cuts and scratches. But day after day, I kept trying and trying until I got it just right. So Humpty Dumpty decides to make a bird that looks like a paper airplane. My plane was perfect, and it flew like nothing could stop it. I hadn't felt that happy in a long time. It wasn't the same as being up in the sky with the birds, but it was close enough. Unfortunately, accidents happen. They always do. I almost walked away again. But then I thought about all the time I'd spent working on my plane and all the other things I'd missed. I decided I was going to climb that wall. But the higher I got, the more nervous I felt. I didn't want to admit it. I was terrified. I didn't look up. I didn't look down. I just kept climbing, one step at a time, until I was no longer afraid. Maybe now you won't think of me as that egg who was famous for falling. Hopefully, you'll remember me as the egg who got back up. And learned how to fly. What a wonderful story. Thank you for reading it with me. Now we are going to recount or retell the story using our 5-finger retell. We talked a little bit about it as I read the book. Our somebody is Humpty Dumpty. What did he want? He wanted to be close to the birds. But this is what was his problem. His problem is he's afraid of heights. Our next part is so. So what does Humpty Dumpty do? He decides to start making paper airplanes that look like birds to remind him of what it's like to be high up by the birds. So Humpty Dumpty wanted to be close to the birds, but he was afraid of heights. So he starts to make paper airplanes, and one of them lands on top of the wall. In the end, I want you to think about, how does Humpty Dumpty solve his problem at the end of the story? In the end, Humpty Dumpty climbs the wall until he gets to the top and faces his fears. Let's put that all together to retell our story. Humpty Dumpty wanted to be close to the birds, but he was afraid of heights. So he begins to make paper airplanes that look like birds until one lands on top of the wall. In the end, he climbs up to the top of the wall and faces his fears. So now we have just recounted the story. The next thing that we need to do is determine the central message. And since we've already recounted the story, that will help us in determining the central message. So let's go back to our anchor chart and review the steps that we need to take to determine the central message. Again, the central message is the lesson that the author is teaching you and me as the readers. The first question to determine the central message is, what is the problem? We talked about the problem of the story in our retelling. And our but. The problem in the story is Humpty Dumpty is afraid of heights. What does the character do about the problem? In the end of the story, Humpty Dumpty decides to climb the wall all the way to the top. Step 3, what lesson does the character learn? In the end of the story, after he makes it to the top of the wall, Humpty Dumpty realizes and learns that you should face your fears. Step 4, what lesson does the author want you to learn? Take some time to think about that. What should we learn from this story after the fall? What I'm thinking about is that the author wants us to learn that we need to not give up and face our fears just like Humpty Dumpty did. So now that we have learned how to recount or retell a story using a 5-finger retell, somebody, wanted, but, so, in the end, and how to determine the central message. Again, the central message is the lesson that the author is teaching you. Now you can practice both of these skills. Using a book that you have at home, I challenge you to read the story and recount it using your 5-finger retell. You can also write down your 5-finger retell on some paper. After you've done that, I challenge you to find out, what is the central message? What is the lesson that the author is trying to teach you? Thank you so much for reading with me, and I hope you have a great day.